Hello and welcome. My name is Noor Hoban.
And I'm Madeline Canoyer. And together, we will be taking you on a tumultuous journey through the world of Chinese photography.
Government of 4 of Shanghai, taken by Luo Yongjin in 2006, is the focus of this episode.
We use this image to examine the political and biased nature of photography in 20th century China.
Along the way, we will also present 2 other images as case studies to help progress your understanding of Government of 4 of Shanghai. Any images we discuss will be linked to the bottom of the Bates College Museum of Art podcast website.
Don't fret, we're back. But before we start, I'd like you to stop. Take a moment and open your phone. Maybe you already have it out. That says something about modern day society. We really can't go anywhere without them. Anyways, look at your lock screen. I'm assuming it might be a picture, perhaps of you, your family, or friends. Either way, it serves as a record for a distinct moment. Now ask yourself if that image is accurate. What happened 5 seconds before and 5 seconds after it was captured? Do you remember or know? Who took this photo and what was their intention? Every time we look at an image, we believe it holds a sense of truth value. So often, we allow photographs to serve as pieces of concrete evidence to verify something actually occurred. Yet, very rarely do we stop and question our trust in a documentary photograph. This is one of the reasons that the camera can be weaponized to manipulate our perception of the outside world. Fear not, however, if you are currently contemplating your naiveness and wondering how you could be so clueless. No, you aren't the only one who has fallen victim to the deception of a camera and a photograph. In fact, we do this on a daily basis without even realizing it. This is a widespread issue that has plagued the globe for centuries. The story of Chinese documentary photography began in the mid-19th century during a time when the government was dealing with the Opium Wars of 1839 to 1842 and 1856 to 1860, the beginning of the treaty port system, and the decay of the Qing dynasty.
Madeline, did the nation's suffering pique foreign interest in China?
Great question, Noor. Thank you so much for asking it. Yes, people from other nations visited China to capture history and action through the lens of a camera. Their work was incredibly popular, often ending up in photo albums, on postcards, and in the press. Photographic studios also started emerging at various locations around the city, contributing to widespread access to the medium like never before. But as we will soon learn, this only lasted for so long.
How did the Chinese government react to all of this?
Yeah, exactly. That builds on the point that I was just making. Thank you so much for the nice lead-in, Noor. Well, the onset of the Sino-Japanese War and the Chinese Civil War increased government censorship across the board. The government's strict scrutiny continued when Mao Zedong came to power in 1949. Zedong and the People's Republic of China laid the foundation for later examples of fraudulent photography through the obsession of projecting an ideal image to the outside world, which is kind of ridiculous because, as we all know, it's impossible to be perfect.
This kind of reminds me of the government censorship in 2017 of images comparing Xi Jinping and Winnie the Pooh, fearful the association would wreck China's public image.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. That's a great point. Clearly, the desire to appear perfect has been a long-standing focus for China. Zhang Dali, a Chinese visual artist, recognized this problem and set out on a mission to prove images of Zedong were doctored. Dali notably said, fusing fiction with reality, manipulated documentary photos represent Mao's China not as what it was, but as what it ought to be. Dali is speaking to the reality that China was presenting itself one way through images, when in actuality, the country wasn't as perfect as Mao was hoping.
Similarly, Luo Yongjin uses this camera to comment on the ways in which the Chinese government is irresponsibly spending money to create westernized spaces, and trying to prove that they have modernized even though that is not fully the case.
Exactly. Thank you for making that distinct connection, Noor. Mao Zedong and the Mao Zedong era really epitomizes the notion that doctoring images is a form of propaganda. The photographer Luo Yongjin of Government 04 of Shanghai is using his camera to shed light on these falsified conceptions.
Edgar Snow's Chairman Mao in northern Shanxi, taken in 1978, which can be viewed at the bottom of the Bates College Museum of Art podcast website, is a great example of classic manipulation.
Yes, very true. It's actually a group of 4 images, all of Mao, but changed in different ways. The first photograph was taken in 1936 in black and white and shows Mao standing before a dilapidated wall. His expression is stern, and the wrinkles across his face allude to a sense of distress and exhaustion. In 1972, the original photograph was edited in color. The cracks in the wall were fixed, and Mao's face was repaired to look more desirable. The 1936 image is significantly more accurate. Mao's tired straight is attributed to the fact that the Red Army, the Communist Party in China, which Mao led, had just finished their 6,000-mile march, which ended in the city of Shanghai, the site of the photograph. This example testifies to the ways that history and social context can be lost from images or doctored to convey a certain political message. If we want to understand an image, rather than be played by an image, we must dig deep and look beyond the initial features our eyes naturally draw us towards.
So Madeline, how does the history of Mao Zedong and the photographic manipulation present under his rule relate to Government of 4 of Shanghai taken by Luo Yongjin?
Another great question. Luo Yongjin is an artist who expects viewers to approach his image with an understanding of China's past because he does not provide that context in his documentary photographs like other artists do. I'm not really sure why, and I don't think it's the smartest decision, but either way, in an interview, Yongjin said it would be best if they had some knowledge of Chinese history, at least since the 1950s, and if possible, some general notions about traditional Chinese buildings. Noor and I are trying to provide that for you so that you can approach Government 04 of Shanghai with a greater understanding about what has been going on in China since really the 1850s when we saw the Opium Wars emerge until now, 2006, when the photograph was taken. Anyways, Noor, it's your turn to have the floor.
Thank you, Madeline. To start, I want you to think of Washington, D.C. You're standing at the steps of the United States Capitol building, listening to the hustle and bustle of tourists around you.
Hold on a second. I know I went on the 8th grade DC trip, but that was 5 years ago. I forgot what the U.S. Capitol building looks like. I know, it's pretty bad, but can you jog my memory?
For sure. Well, you were first greeted by a roaring lion statue. Your eyes drift down the driveway, up the grand staircase, and through the wide open door. The famous rotunda piques your interest, and you notice the floor levels decrease in size as you proceed upwards. Then your eyes drift back downwards to the top piece of a triangular roof. A single emblem occupies the space, proudly displaying a singular star surrounded by 4 more. Oh wait, something is clearly off, Madeline.
Oh my gosh, Noor, where are the American flags?
Never mind, we're actually in Shanghai, China, standing in front of the Shanghai Minhan People's Courthouse.
What?
Government 04 of Shanghai, taken by Luo Yongjin in 2006, is a photograph of this building.
Oh my gosh, I just don't understand why 2 government buildings 7,422 miles apart are almost identical. It doesn't make sense, Noor. The resemblance between them is just uncanny. From the Greek temple front and the columns underneath to the arched windows, the U.S. Capitol building is modeled on the Greco-Roman style, which is widely considered to represent democracy. America has claimed itself to be a democracy for a long time, yet the U.S. Capitol building is a contradiction in and of itself because it was built by enslaved peoples. This raises the question of why China would want to appropriate these forms of architectural democracy when they themselves are not a democratic nation.
That's a great point. Let's start at the beginning of China's long history of architectural mimicry, which is defined as anything that copies an existing structure. This practice is relatively common in China and dates back to the 3rd century BCE, when powerful individuals have been copying existing architectural feats from an enemy or rival.
So, designing the Shanghai Minhan's People's Courthouse, sorry, that's a mouthful, as a replica of the U.S. Capitol building, clearly visible in the photograph Government 04 Shanghai, is an attempt by the Chinese government to display the power they have gained on both a local and global scale. I guess you could say they're getting a bit cocky, but all nations do at some point in time.
In short, yes. But as it turns out, there are multiple other reasons why these two government buildings on opposite sides of the globe are so similar. I'd like to turn our attention towards a story that began in the mid-20th century with Mao Zedong and the policy of rustication. As a result of these policies, urban planning and architectural styles did not develop in China as they had in the rest of the world.
For our listeners who might not know, rustification refers to the policies enacted by Mao Zedong during the mid-20th century that forced the distribution of educated Chinese youth into agricultural communities. Now, under a widespread boom in urbanization as well as industrialization, housing markets in these urban areas have been under strain since the late 20th century to provide space for China's rising industrial centers. This comes at a time when the whole world is industrializing and the nations who don't get on that trend are seen as less than. So China definitely feels the pressure to move away from the traditional agrarian lifestyle. Anyways, it was also around this time that Chinese urban planners were often replaced by their Soviet counterparts. In the early 21st century, this led to severe underexperience among many Chinese urban planners and architects who were being called upon to build modern Chinese cities. Nor, how does this relate to the Shanghai Minhai People's Courthouse?
We know this courthouse is a replica of the U.S. Capitol building. In fact, there are multiple buildings in China that go as far as to replicate this replica, such as one in Anhui province. During the turn of the century, Chinese architects began to relate power and wealth with Euro-American lifestyles and structures. This trend was widespread because traditional indigenous and USSR architectural styles became related to the tragedies associated with the Cultural Revolution and the larger Mao era in China. Chinese architects looked to the West for inspiration, often replicating American and European monuments and structures. All of this is done in an effort to make China appear more modern to the outside world.
Exactly. This ties into the idea that documentary photographs are not actually that truthful. I know, but hear me out. Ironically, Luo Yongjin's Government 04 of Shanghai, taken in 2006, is a photograph of a manipulated space. So it's really a projection of two forms of doctoration. The first is the building itself, and the second is Yongjin's photograph showing the manipulation in such a way as to prove manipulation actually occurred in the first place.
You know what? I remember reading that in some of the interviews we were able to find. The artist stated that he is strongly against the Westernization of Chinese buildings, siding with the belief that replicating Western architecture is kitschy and unoriginal. Hence, he took a picture of the Shanghai Minhai People's Courthouse.
Now that you mention that, the interviews, I think it is important to note that this photograph is considered a conceptual landscape, meaning that it lacks any human or figural form. This is a practice Luo Yongjin started doing about 10 years into his career. He found that buildings can oftentimes become reflections of the people who occupy and create them. This is where Yongjin devotes most of his energy as a photographer towards capturing the essence of the purpose these buildings may serve. Like a traditional Chinese landscape painter, Yongjin wants the viewer to feel the vague uncomfortableness and placelessness that comes with standing in front of the Shanghai Minhai People's Courthouse.
Yongjin attempts to capture the idea of the places that he photographs more so than what they might actually look like, similar to a landscape painter's intentions. Traditionally in China, landscape painting focuses on mountains and other natural spaces. Madeline, since you mentioned this earlier, do you want to relate this back to Chinese photographic history?
For sure, I'd love to, Noor. Landscape painting is important to Chinese photographic history because it is represented in the same regard as more traditional forms of painting. As I mentioned earlier in this podcast, documentary images in China were often doctored to give people a particular idea of a place, and that idea was not always accurate.
Within the context of the photograph, Government 04 Shanghai, a lot of this remains true. Viewers are presented with a lack of information because there is no way for them to decipher the placement of the Shanghai Minhai People's Courthouse within the city of Shanghai. It is also unclear how many people pass this building on a daily basis, but we do know it serves an important practical role for the Chinese government. Nonetheless, the image and the caption are very threatening as they convey a sense of superiority in relation to Shanghai. The title of the photograph, Government 04 of Shanghai, gives us key identifying information, and without it, the building would be placeless.
That's so true. And this is also seen in some of Yongjin's other work, such as his photograph titled Lotus Block, taken between 1998 and 2002, which comments on the negative effects of modernization. The image forces the viewer to question what happens when all of China's landscapes look nearly identical. Perhaps Yongjin is worried about individuality and personal freedom being lost through modernization, like it was under Mao Zedong's reign. Manipulation and falsified messaging to the outside world have only led to propaganda and the past, and I think it's quite possible Yongjin fears this dangerous reality could recirculate if China continues to copy Westernized spaces.
While no one image is ever 100% accurate, some images hold a greater truth value than others. At the end of the day, the only real way to pinpoint documentary photographs that hold a definite sense of truth value is through close observation of both the artist's intention and the way in which those desires are conveyed in a given image. However, as a society, we do not teach visual literacy defined as the ability to decode images. Therefore, our system does not allow individuals to linger on documentary photographs and contemplate their meaning.
Yet, this is not to say we can't defy those odds at times. While I don't recommend scrutinizing a friend's Instagram post to determine if Photoshop and other forms of manipulation have been used, it is worth pausing when your heart is telling you something is off about a photograph, or really anything in life. Always trust your instincts, because more times than not, they are right. Never feel the pressure to succumb to groupthink, especially now that you have the ability to push back and question forms of visual representations. If this podcast piqued your interest, please check out the other 14 episodes in this series produced by our classmates, which can also be found on the Bates College Museum of Art podcast website. Nor and I have had such an amazing time taking you through this journey here with us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Nor, do you have any final words?
Not really, but thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.
See you later. Wait, that was so good.
It's still recording, my dude.
Oh, come on. Are we still
To be
going?
honest.